The army told the nation that its best generals were trained at West Point, men of discipline, precision, and polish. The truth was that one of the most feared American commanders of World War II was kicked out of the academy in disgrace. And by the time the Germans learned his name, it was already too late. This is the story of the only man to build two separate elite divisions from the ground up, and the violent rebellion that saved thousands of American lives. If you studied the class photographs from West Point in the early 1900s, you'll recognize the faces that shaped the Second World War. There's Dwight Eisenhower, the diplomat; Omar Bradley, steady as a metronome; George Patton, born into privilege and destined for command. All of them graduated. All of them wore the ring. But walking those same stone corridors was a cadet who would never make it to graduation day. A man who brawled behind the barracks, drank when he shouldn't, and cared more about cavalry charges than calculus. His name was Terry de la Mesa Allen, and long before enemy soldiers whispered the name Terrible Terry in fear, the United States Army did everything it could to throw him out. Terry Allen didn't choose the military. It chose him before he was born. His father was a colonel. His mother descended from a Spanish officer. War was woven into his bloodline. But West Point didn't care about heritage. It cared about grades, comportment, order. And in 1912, Terry Allen was drowning. He stuttered badly, turning classroom recitations into public humiliation. While his classmates quoted military theory with confidence, Allen was throwing punches in the shadows. Mathematics defeated him. Ordnance destroyed him. By his second year, the academy had reached a verdict. Terry Allen was summoned to the commandant's office and told to leave. Discharged for academic deficiency. Failed out. Finished. For nearly every man, that would be the final chapter. A quiet return home, a life selling insurance or managing a store, a slow erosion of what might have been. Terry Allen refused to accept it. He enrolled at Catholic University, earned a degree, and clawed his way back into the Army through sheer force of will, passing a competitive exam that earned him a commission as a second lieutenant in the cavalry. He had entered through the side door, uninvited, and he carried a grudge the size of the continental United States. Then came 1918, the Great War. While the polished academy graduates shuffled papers in headquarters tents, Captain Terry Allen was waist-deep in the blood and mud of the Saint Mihiel and Meuse-Argonne Offensives, leading a battalion of the 90th Division. This was where the dropout finally found his education. The lesson arrived on a fog-soaked morning in October 1918 during a savage push against entrenched German positions. Allen was at the front, a habit that would later horrify his superiors, when a German rifle round struck him directly in the face. The bullet tore through his jaw, shattered bone, and ripped out several teeth. Blood sheeted down his tunic. His face was a wreck. His men froze, certain he would collapse or call for evacuation. Any reasonable officer would have been carried to a field hospital immediately. Any sane man would have accepted the injury as a ticket home. Terry Allen spat a mouthful of blood and shattered enamel into the mud. He couldn't speak, his jaw hung loose and useless, but he did not retreat. According to those who were there, he tied a field dressing around his skull to hold the bone in place, drew his sidearm, and simply motioned his men forward. He refused evacuation until the objective was secured and his soldiers were dug in safely. For days afterward, he commanded through hand signals and guttural sounds, leading his battalion through the nightmare of the Argonne forest, with his face held together by gauze and willpower. When the armistice was signed, the man West Point had thrown away wore a silver star for his actions in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive on his chest and a jagged scar across his face. The Army realized its mistake. Terry Allen wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a tactician in the classical sense. He was something far rarer and far more dangerous. He was a pure warrior. But as the guns fell silent and the treaties were signed, a new question emerged. The rebel had proven he could fight, but could he survive the peace? The generals in Washington wanted obedient men. What they had in Terry Allen was a grenade with the pin half pulled, waiting for the next war. When American forces waded ashore in North Africa on November 8, 1942 for Operation Torch, they were an army searching for an identity. Green, untested, clutching training manuals like scripture. The troops were scared. The officers were cautious. Everyone was trying not to make a career-ending mistake. But in the middle of this anxious, regulation-obsessed force, there was one unit that didn't look like a military formation at all. It looked like a pirate crew. This was the First Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and it had been molded entirely in the image of its commander, Terry de la Mesa Allen. To understand the 1st Division under Allen, you need to understand what he despised. Terry Allen hated garrison soldiers. He had no patience for spit-shined boots, starched collars, or parade ground formations. While generals like George Patton believed that tight uniforms built tight discipline, Allen believed that aggression and spirit kept men alive. He cultivated a culture that horrified the high command. His soldiers stopped shaving. They left their tunics unbuttoned. They threw away heavy, useless regulation equipment and replaced it with extra ammunition and captured enemy weapons. They walked with a swagger that crossed the line into arrogance. To British allies and rear echelon military police, they looked like armed drifters. The press started calling them Allen's Gangsters, and Allen loved every word of it. He didn't just tolerate the behavior, he encouraged it. He told his officers, "I don't care if they salute me. I care if they kill Germans." He was building something deeper than discipline. He was building tribal loyalty. He wanted his men to believe they were superior to everyone else on the battlefield, better than the British, better than other American divisions, and especially better than Rommel's Africa Corps. The result was a unit that became a nightmare when it wasn't in combat. In the rear areas around Oran and Algiers, the 1st Division was uncontrollable. They started brawls in bars. They hijacked supply convoys to steal better rations. They mocked officers from other units who showed up with clean uniforms and regulation haircuts. General Omar Bradley, a man who treated war like engineering, looked at Allen's division with barely concealed disgust. He saw chaos, a mob in uniform. But then the shooting started. When disaster struck at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where inexperienced American forces were shattered by Erwin Rommel's panzers, elements of the 1st Division helped in the subsequent counteroffensive. While other units fractured and fled, the 1st Division held the line. They fought with a savage, personal hatred that startled even the Germans. Allen had taught them that survival meant being more vicious than the enemy. He spent his time in foxholes, not command posts. He drank with his enlisted men. He ignored headquarters orders if he thought they would get his soldiers killed for no reason. There's a story that captures Allen's philosophy perfectly. During a review, a staff officer from headquarters complained that the 1st Division's marching was sloppy and their formation crooked. Allen took a long drag from his cigarette, looked at the immaculate officer, and growled, "My men can't march, but they don't die, and they don't surrender." He had forged the Big Red One into the most effective killing instrument in the American arsenal. But in doing so, he had created powerful enemies. Patton and Bradley were watching the gangster general with growing resentment. They saw a man becoming larger than the institution itself, a man whose loyalty belonged to his soldiers, not the chain of command. They needed his fighters, but they were already planning how to remove the man who built them. Allen had created a brotherhood of war, but he was about to discover that politics is the deadliest battlefield of all. By July 1943, the legend of Terry Allen had reached a breaking point. The setting was Sicily, dusty, sun-scorched, and soaked in blood. The Allied invasion, Operation Husky, was underway, and the Big Red One was once again at the tip of the spear. But while Allen drove his men forward, a different kind of war was brewing behind the lines. The Germans feared Allen's tactical brilliance, but the American High Command had begun to fear his independence. To Generals George Patton and Omar Bradley, Terry Allen was becoming dangerous, not because he was failing, but because he was winning too well. He was building a private army inside the United States Army. Bradley, the schoolmaster general, looked at the 1st Division and saw a unit that felt more loyalty to Terrible Terry than to the flag. The soldiers of the Big Red One spoke of themselves as separate, elite. They believed they were winning the war single-handedly. They looked down on everyone else. Bradley blamed this arrogance directly on Allen. He believed Allen was loving the division too much, shielding them from discipline, acting as though the rules didn't apply to him or his gangsters. The tension exploded at the Battle of Troina. Troina was the highest fortified town in Sicily, a medieval fortress perched on a granite mountain, defended by hardened veterans of the German 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. It was the toughest nut the Allies had to crack in the entire campaign. Beginning on July 31st, for 6 days, the 1st Division threw itself against the rock. The heat was unbearable. German artillery was relentless. It was a meat grinder. Patton, hungry for glory, demanded results. He threatened to relieve commanders if the town wasn't taken immediately. But Allen ignored the theatrics. He knew that rushing up that mountain would be suicide. Instead, he orchestrated a masterclass in combined arms warfare. He called in devastating airstrikes. He coordinated artillery barrages that turned the mountain into a volcano. He maneuvered his infantry inch by bloody inch, grinding the Germans down until they finally broke. On August 6th, the Big Red One entered the ruins of Troina. It was a magnificent victory. Terry Allen had delivered the prize that broke the German line in Sicily. He expected a commendation. Instead, he got a firing squad. Less than 24 hours after the victory at Troina, Omar Bradley summoned Allen to his headquarters. The meeting was short, cold, and brutal. Bradley told Allen he was being relieved of command. The official reason was combat fatigue. They claimed Allen was too tired to lead effectively, that the war had worn him down. It was a lie, and Allen knew it. He stood there, the dust of Troina still on his uniform, his eyes blazing. "Hell," he reportedly said. "I'm not tired, I'm just getting started." But the decision was final. The army wanted their division back. They wanted to break the cult of personality. They fired not only Allen, but also his assistant commander, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the son of the former president. The gangster generals were out. The scene of Allen's departure is one of the most emotional moments in American military history. As he walked out of the command tent for the last time, word spread through the ranks like wildfire. They fired the old man. Thousands of soldiers, men who had marched through hell for him, men who refused to salute other officers but would die for Terry Allen, lined the dusty Sicilian roads. They didn't cheer, they didn't salute, they just watched in stunned silence. Many were openly weeping. Allen walked down the line, tears streaming down his own scarred face, shaking hands with the grunts, the sergeants, the muddy riflemen. He had built the greatest fighting force in the European theater, and now he was being stripped of it because he loved them too much. As his jeep drove away, leaving the Big Red One behind, it felt like the end of the story. The maverick had been broken. The generals had won. Terry Allen was sent back to the United States, effectively exiled, destined to become a footnote. But what Patton and Bradley forgot was the lesson from West Point 30 years earlier. You can knock Terry Allen down, but you can never keep him down. The Timberwolf was coming. For approximately 9 months, Terry Allen had been the most famous division commander in the American Army. Then, abruptly, he became a ghost. After his firing in Sicily, Allen was shipped back to the United States. To the newspapers, it was framed as a rotation. But everyone in the military knew the truth. Allen was in exile. He was sent to El Paso, Texas to command a training camp, a graveyard for careers. The Pentagon expected him to fade away, to retire quietly and play polo while the proper generals finished the war in Europe. But Terry Allen did not fade. He stewed. He paced his office like a caged animal. He bombarded Washington with letters demanding a new command. And miraculously, the army listened. The war in Europe was grinding into a bloody stalemate. The high command realized a hard truth. They had plenty of managers, but they were running low on fighters. In late 1943, Allen was given the impossible, a second chance. He was handed the 104th Infantry Division, known as the Timberwolves. But this was not the Big Red One. The 1st Division had been filled with rough, hard-drinking regulars. The 104th was filled with draftees, Young kids, college students, farm boys who had never heard a shot fired in anger. Allen looked at these fresh faces and decided to try something radical. He wasn't just going to train them, he was going to rewire their biology. Allen had spent his exile analyzing the battlefield. He realized that American troops were being slaughtered because they fought on the enemy's terms. They attacked during the day when German artillery spotters could see them clearly and machine guns had perfect lines of sight. When the sun went down, the American army stopped, dug in, and slept. Allen decided to flip the script. He told his new division, "The night is not a cloak for the enemy, it is a cloak for us." He turned the Timberwolves into creatures of the dark. The training regimen he instituted was brutal and revolutionary. The entire division shifted its schedule. They slept during the day and trained at night. They learned to navigate dense forests in pitch blackness without flashlights. They learned to dismantle and reassemble their rifles by touch alone. They conducted live-fire exercises in total darkness, with machine gun rounds screaming overhead, to inoculate them against the chaos of nocturnal combat. Allen's doctrine was simple but terrifying: attack without artillery. Standard American doctrine was to blast a target with cannons before advancing, but that warned the Germans you were coming. Allen taught the Timberwolves to creep forward in total silence under cover of darkness and be inside German foxholes with bayonets and grenades before the enemy even woke up. For months, he drove them relentlessly. His motto for the division was, "Nothing in hell must stop the Timberwolves." He was harder on them than he had ever been on the First Division, because he knew that unlike the veterans of Africa, these boys had no experience to fall back on. Discipline had to be their armor. On September 7, 1944, the 104th Infantry Division landed in Cherbourg, France. The skepticism from the top was thick. Omar Bradley and Dwight Eisenhower were watching closely, expecting the rebel to fail. They expected Allen to lose control again. But as the Timberwolves moved toward the front lines in Belgium, they weren't a ragtag mob. They were silent, disciplined, deadly. By late 1944, the German High Command believed they had the American army figured out. To Wehrmacht veterans, the Americans were predictable. They loved their artillery, they loved their air support, and they loved the daylight. When the sun went down, the battlefield typically went silent. The Germans used the night to rest, resupply, and move their panzers, safe in the knowledge that the Americans wouldn't attack until after breakfast. Terry Allen and the 104th Infantry Division shattered that sense of safety. As the Timberwolves ground their way into the Rhineland, the Germans realized they were facing a new breed of enemy. Reports began filtering back to German headquarters, speaking of night phantoms. Defending units would go to sleep in secure bunkers, surrounded by minefields, only to wake up with a knife at their throat. Allen had successfully implemented his silent attack doctrine. Instead of the thunderous artillery barrages that usually announced an American advance, giving the Germans time to retreat into deep cellars, the Timberwolves struck in total silence. They moved like shadows across the freezing beet fields of Holland and Germany. They didn't fire their rifles. They used grenades and bayonets. For the German soldier, this was psychological torture. The night, which had been their sanctuary, was now a place of terror. German prisoners captured by the 104th were often found in a state of shock. One captured officer reportedly told his interrogator, "We know when the other divisions are coming. The ground shakes. But you are just suddenly there." The Timberwolves became masters of the night attack. In the brutal fighting for the Roer River and the push toward Cologne, Allen's men executed daring nocturnal river crossings that caught the enemy completely off guard. The discipline required was immense. One accidental cough, one clinking canteen could doom an entire battalion. But Allen's training held firm. By the spring of 1945, the 104th was spearheading the Allied drive into the heart of the Reich. They weren't just winning battles, they were racing. Allen, now fully redeemed and operating at the peak of his tactical genius, drove his men relentlessly. They took the city of Halle in a bitter 5-day battle, dismantling fanatical resistance street by street. Then they made history. Pushing all the way to the Mulde River on April 25, 1945, the 104th Infantry Division became one of the very first American units to link up with the Soviet Army. In the ruins of a defeated nation, the Timberwolves shook hands with the Red Army. It was the symbolic end of the Third Reich. For Terry Allen, standing on the banks of the Mulde was the ultimate vindication. 2 years earlier, he had been fired, humiliated, and sent home as a burnt-out case. Now, he stood deep in enemy territory, commanding a division that terrified the Wehrmacht, having led them through combat from September 1944 to war's end. He never got the Fourth Star. He never got the press coverage of Patton or the political power of Eisenhower. He remained a major general until he retired. But to the men of the Big Red One and the Timberwolves, rank didn't matter. Terrible Terry Allen was the only general in World War II to build 2 separate divisions into elite fighting forces. He proved that you didn't need to be a polished diplomat.